Crunch test. Here are the sliced discs. So crunchy, super good. Let's get ready for the big pickle. Oh my god. Oh my god. Really good. Put that on a sandwich. Eat it like this. Guys, nothing better. Let's do a cross cut. Perfect. Perfect. Every time. Happy camper. Look how, oh my goodness, look at that. All right, so let's make some dill pickles. These are the materials that you're going to need. So of course, you're going to start with some cucumbers that are for pickle making. You can use any type of cucumber, honestly, but these are specific cucumber pickles. You're going to need a mixing bowl. You're going to need some dill, which is what I have right here. You can use fresh and or dried, depending on the type of pickle that you'd like to make. You can also use other herbs and spices if you want to have a variation, but I'm making a dill pickle here. You're going to need white vinegar. This is just white wine vinegar. You can also use apple cider vinegar, that also works, but you're just going to want to make sure that your percentage of acidity is above a 2.5 if you're doing a refrigerator pickle, but if you're going to do a shelf-stable one, you're going to want it to be over 5% because the acidity will essentially pasteurize the pickles and will make them shelf-stable. But because I'm making a refrigerator pickle, you know, I'm still going to use the 6% vinegar because I like to have, you know, an acidic, crunchy pickle. But if you're wanting to do something a little bit less acid, you can go all the way down to a 2.5, which is just this diluted with some water. You're going to need a jar to put them in, of course, so that they can marinate, and then you're going to need a knife if you want to cut them up. You're going to need quite a bit of salt because you're going to draw the moisture out of these cucumbers to be made into pickles. And if you want to have some sweetness to your pickle, you can either add honey or, you know, if you don't care, you can do white sugar for a more neutral palate. And then, or taste for your palate. And then I also really like to have a micro scale so that I'm weighing everything and I'm being appropriate. Otherwise, you can also use measuring spoons like tablespoons if you do prefer. So let's get started. Now, I don't do this with all vegetables, or even fruits, because technically cucumbers are a fruit. But when I'm washing, I'll actually just take an old, you know, like washcloth that I've transformed into like a kitchen towel. And I will rub it this way just to get all the excess dirt off. I find it works much faster than using like a brush, for example. And of course, I'm just going to take this notch off right here, trying to be as close to it as possible. So I'm taking the least amount off, but just so that the stem isn't too hard. All right, so just cleaning this off. And I'm not going to be, you know, very uptight about this because these are going to be washed again, actually, after we do our next step. And so this is the flour section. I'm just going to rub this off right here. And this is the harder section. I'm just going to take this edge off. So for the purpose of showing you multiple things, I'm going to do a set of whole dill pickles, and I'll do a few that I will, you know, cut so that they will be in spears so that you can get an idea of like the crunchy factor and how I would go about processing my dill pickles in various ways. And so because these pickles are from the farm and they're not perfect like you would get from a grocery store, when you have a blemish like this on a pickle, I will, of course, take this off real easy and I'll just keep shaving off until there's nothing left. And I will make sure that this will be one of the cucumbers that I cut up into spears. All right, so the next step is that we are going to extract the water from inside this cucumber. A cucumber has a ton of water in it, and I want to take that water out and I want to put vinegar in so that I get a nice crunchy, acidic dill pickle. If I were to ferment this, or if I were to pickle this with only vinegar without pulling moisture out of this thing, my dill pickle wouldn't be acidic and be just kind of like a cucumber. So not as interesting. So this step is really important. So basically, as you can tell, this cucumber is really quite stiff. And like any other kind of produce that you buy from the store, when you let it go for a few days, it'll eventually shrivel and get old, and it won't hold its shape and it'll become more loose. And what that is moisture being lost from the fruit and or vegetable. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that process sped up, but without having there be spoilage. So we're going to put all of our cucumbers in our mixing bowl, and we are going to cover them with salt to draw that moisture out. However, before I go about doing that, what is really important to do beforehand is to take your jar and to kind of get an idea about what kind of organization you want to have in your jar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take maybe my fat ones are going to be cut up ones, and maybe my long skinny ones like this one are going to be staying whole. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of figure out how I want to get all of these cucumbers into my jar. And I may end up using a second jar, and it seems like only 3 are going to fit whole, and the others I'm going to have to split up. So we'll do it this way. These will be my 3 whole ones, and the other ones I will cut up. In any case, it is good practice to organize yourself so that you know what to expect when you're trying to fit your product into your jars. So these 3, because I'm not going to do anything to them, they are just going to go directly into my mixing bowl that I'm going to add salt to later, and these I'm going to cut up. So this cucumber, I'm going to split in half, and oh, it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to do one of these, and I'm just going to do this in quarters because I like to have a big crunchy pickle. So how about I will do pickle spears, and as you can tell, I'm following that center line down so that there is some integrity of the pickle, and it's not too off center. So how about I do I have 3 whole ones, I have 2 spears, and how about these? I will do round ones, which are, bread and butter pickles technically. Now, if you do have a mandolin, you can absolutely do this with a mandolin, but for the sake of making this as easy as possible, we're just going to do this with a knife. And you're just going to do slices about this thick. But if you're wanting something thinner, I would then recommend a mandolin. But I still want my pickles that are going to be discs to not disappear on a sandwich. I want them to hold up and still bring that acidic crunch that I'm looking for. All right, so now that I have all of my pickles cut up that I do want to cut up, I'm realizing that I might need more than 1 jar. So what you're going to see is I'm going to fill 1 jar completely, and I'll put my over into another jar, and that way you're going to get 1 full jar plus some extra, which is always what happens when you're processing your groceries. You're going to get a full jar because you buy enough, then you're probably going to get some spillovers. That will also be happening in the video. All right, so like I said, we are going to be putting all of these into a mixing bowl, and we are going to be covering the whole thing in salt. And the salt's job is going to pull moisture out of these pickles, and we are going to let it sit for quite a few hours. You can stir it, and that will speed up the process, but we're just trying to get the moisture out. So we are just trying to get the moisture out so that when we add our vinegar, we are replacing that water lost with some acidic brine, and that's going to give us a tasty cucumber. So here's everything, and honestly, I'm just going to pour this on top. Give it a shake, and then after we're going to stir it in with our hands. So this, I'm just gonna let sit as is for, maybe about an hour, and then we'll come back and we'll look at all of the water that this is going to produce. All right, so it's been about an hour and a half since I've salted my pickles to pull some water out. And as you can tell, I've got all this liquid right here. So what I'm gonna do, I don't usually do this, but just for visual, I'm gonna pull all this over so you can see how much liquid I've actually got. All right, so pulling all this over. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna let this sit for even longer because this is not done yet. But you'll see the amount of liquid that's been pulled out, and the goal is to get my cucumbers to be as soft as possible so that when they're reabsorbing vinegar, when they rehydrate with vinegar to make an acidic pickle. So this is the amount of water that I've pulled out so far, which honestly is not bad for the amount of cut pickles that I have. But these are still a little bit hard, so they need to sit a little bit longer in the salt. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give this whole thing a mix, and just to kind of redistribute the salt, I'm just going to give this whole thing a mix, and we'll check back even later. So when I'm doing more spears and more discs, slices like this, the salt extraction will take maybe around like an hour or two, depending on how much salt I'm using and how thinly I've made my spears or my discs. This honestly could sit for 2 hours and then I could let it go. Even just these small discs could sit for even just 30 minutes in the salt and it would be good. But even these larger ones, because of how thick they are and because I've not pierced the skin, this could honestly sit in salt for like 6 to 12 hours, even half the day, because of the amount of salt that's going to be around it. Obviously it won't go bad on the countertop and you'll get some water extraction, which is what you're wanting. But when you have a cut surface, the water comes out so much easier. These guys are already done, but I'm going to keep going because these guys are still kind of hard. Also, for the sake of food safety, because I know it might be a question for some people, with the amount of salt that's on the surface of these guys, these are just fine sitting out, but if you are nervous, you can put them in the fridge and let this whole process happen in a cooler environment. But it's the middle of summer and I'm doing this, and honestly, it's just fine. So how can you tell when your pickle is done salting? So this is the flimsiness of my pickle here, and that is a perfect sign of a ready to go pickle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these guys aside, and then I'm going to test some spears to see if any of my spears are ready to be set aside. So for example, let's look at this one. It's soft, but I would like it to go a little bit farther. As you can tell, this one is much more ready. So this one I'm going to set aside, and I'm just sorting. So like this one, for example, super not done, but this is a bigger guy compared to the other one I just put aside as well. Same thing. Oh, this one, still a big guy, but he had more salt on him, so he's a little bit readier. I'm still gonna leave him in here though, but all of these discs I'm going to take out. So this guy, he's also pretty good. And I know you might be thinking that, I should drain this water off, but when I go and put my hand in there, there is a ton of salt in here. So there is still some water that can be extracted from these soon-to-be pickles. So I'm just gonna dump these right in. And also another thing that you can do is you can do this on like a baking sheet, for example, if you wanna have a more even salt coverage. And so all I'm going to do right here is I'm gonna push all this aside, grab some salt, and just salt the top again. And I'll be back in another hour. All right, so I've let these pickles, or these cucumbers, sit in water for quite a while. And as you can see, these big guys now are pretty flexible, which means that it's a pretty good sign that they are as drained as possible of their water. And I hope you can tell, but this is the amount of water that I have drained out. Let me show you. So this is all of the water that I have drained out of my cucumbers. And if you want a pickle that is not as acidic, you can absolutely just do less. But this water that you have right here, you don't want. All of this should be thrown out because it is incredibly salty. If anything, you can use this water as like your salting ingredient. So instead of using like 1 tablespoon of salt, you would use a tablespoon of this just because of how salty it is. And it does have some cucumber essence. So now, because of the amount of salt that was here and, that's here, what I'm going to do now is these guys, I'm going to rinse them. So the reason why we are rinsing these is because these pickles are saturated with salt and they're incredibly salty. So we just need to make sure that we're taking off as much salt as possible so that these get to be vinegary pickles and not salty ones. And I will usually do this about 2 or 3 times. That's about enough. Maybe even 1 time would be enough to get all of the salt out. I'm not trying to do overkill here. And so with these drained, I can now move on to my next step. All right, so here are my rinsed cucumbers. So next step would be to fashion them into here, and then we will do our vinegar step. So let's get these guys in here. So one thing that you want to remember is that because these are flimsy, when we add our vinegar in, they're going to rehydrate, meaning they're going to expand. And so you want to add extra vinegar over the top so that when they do expand, your pickles still stay submerged and they are not poking their heads out of the top of your vinegar brine. So I have my 3 main pickles here, and honestly, I probably could have done a 4th and smudged it in right there, but that's okay. Now I'm just gonna put those spears in there. I'm just gonna get as much in as possible, and I'm really gonna push it in tight, as tight as I can. And then I will put my little discs on top. All right, so I have things as tight as I can get in here. And now I do have a lot of extra headspace for my disc cucumbers to go on top. Now, usually I don't do dill pickles like this, as in I'll usually do only discs or only spears or mainly just like big solid ones. But, for the sake of helping and showing you how to make a dill pickle, we're doing, this wide variety. And if I'm going to do a dill pickle that is just these little discs, I'll use a smaller jar like this because you can fit a lot more in. You don't need as big of a jar, unless if, you're doing an insane amount of pickles, of course. So I think I'm about done with this jar, and just to give you an idea, I've filled my pickles, my cucumbers up to about this line, and this line right here is where I'm going to pour my still cold vinegar on top to this line right here, because as these cucumbers rehydrate with the vinegar, this line will naturally come down, but I still want it to be above the pickle line. All right, so as I have made dill pickles over the years, there are a few things that I have found to be more practical. And that is, usually people will just take a bunch of vinegar, pour it into a saucepan, and then pour that hot vinegar over their cucumbers to make their pickles. But that's not what I do. Usually what I do, because I don't want to measure, I'll pour this cold in here until I hit this max line. And then, so I don't have to measure, I'll just pour all of that vinegar into here, straining and making sure that these don't get disturbed. And then that way, when this is hot, I don't have to measure and I'm not wasting, my hot vinegar solution. Also, do remember that I did put my cucumbers on top of the dill that is at the bottom of my jar for both jars. And the reason why we're doing hot vinegar is because technically we're going to make a hot infusion, kind of like how you make tea. The hot vinegar is going to steep with the dill, and it's going to help infuse this dill flavor into the rest of my pickles. So let's just open this thing up and start pouring. And these are going to, of course, be French vinegar pickles. All right, here we go. As you can tell, I'm just right below this line, and that's just fine. I'm going to add maybe a few tablespoons of this salty cucumber solution to here to give it a little bit more cucumbery essence. So like I said, I'm just gonna do 1, 2, maybe we're gonna do three spoonfuls here. You know, measure with your heart. That's about what I'm doing. If you're doing this for the first time, you can always just use like regular salt. That also works. All right, so let's not forget about our other jar. We're just gonna fill this in a little bit quicker because we know it's not going to be filled up to the top. We're just gonna scoop it all in and everyone's gonna be a happy camper. There we go. All right, so now I'm gonna do the same thing with this jar, and I think I'm actually gonna end up using this whole liter of vinegar, but we will see. Oh yeah, that's probably gonna use the whole thing. You know, I've got 2 tablespoons left. This whole thing's gonna go in, which honestly, perfect measuring. How about that? So just a quick note on vinegar. Vinegar is soured wine, technically. This vinegar is French vinegar that I get at the store. The store is called La Vie Claire. And it has a 6% acidity. Apple cider vinegar is going to have a 5% acidity. That also works. This is the French way of making your pickles, but you could also do a dilution of this type of vinegar by half. So half water, half vinegar, which would then give you half, so 3% acidity. You're going to get a much more, you know, quote unquote dull pickle. It's not going to be as acid, but it will still be good. And it is still a very good pickle, but they're not as, you know, with as much of a bite as the full vinegar pickles, which I do prefer. All right, so now I'm just gonna pour all of my vinegar into my little sauce pot. All right, so let's talk about salt and sugar real quick. So usually for salt and sugar, there's usually about 1 tablespoon of both salt and sugar per liter. So per whole bottle of vinegar for your pickles. Now, these are of course optional. You can do straight vinegar, that also works. You can do only salt, that also works. You can do only sugar, that also works, but it's just going to give you a different variety of a type of pickle as your end result. Usually people do enjoy a quote unquote sweeter pickle, and so they'll do maybe like 1 tablespoon of salt and they'll do like 3 tablespoons of sugar. And it really depends on the area that you're in, the type of food that you're eating, etc. This is where you can mix and match and find what works best for you. For me, I like the acidity of the vinegar in the pickle. That's what I'm looking for. And so I'm going to do the 3 tablespoons of this I've put in here. And then I'm probably going to do like maybe 2 tablespoons of sugar. You can also, of course, do honey if you're not a fan of sugar. So here is our so-called vinegar, salt, sugar solution that will be poured into our pickles once this gets steaming hot. So I'm not going to boil this. I just need to get hot enough so that I can extract flavor from the dill and so that I dissolve the salt and sugar here. Now, what I do recommend is you don't need to taste this now, but after you've poured this over your pickles, it's infused, and you pop the jar open for the very first time, taste this, and if it tastes good, then you've done the right thing. If you think, oh, this could be sweeter, oh, this could be saltier, then, you know, make your modifications for the next time you make this recipe. All right, so welcome to my little French kitchen stovetop. I just have my vinegar heating up, and once it comes to a simmer, I will pour it over my cucumbers and seasonings. You will smell this when it is ready, so don't worry about it. My vinegar solution is simmering, and I'm gonna now pour it into my jars. All right, so one thing that you do want to be mindful of is the type of jar that you're using. Usually I say that for fermentation, you can use any jar, but when you're doing something with like a hot vinegar, you do want to make sure that your jar can, withstand the hot temperature of pouring, hot steaming vinegar over it. And so if you're unsure, check the packaging and it will tell you on there, or go to the manufacturer's website and it will say also there. All right, pouring in both. I'm gonna pour a little bit extra into this one and into here. So as you can tell, these guys are pretty well submerged and they will have space to expand and still be under the solution. So now I'm just going to put my latch on, and I will let these come down to room temperature before I put them in the fridge. I don't want this to get too cold too fast because I do not want my tempered glass, glass that withstands higher temperatures, to crack or to damage it. So these can be left out until they are, warm to the touch. Then they can go in the fridge and let them sit at least for overnight, but usually about a day is better so that you get a nice crunchy dill pickle. All right, so we are finally ready to open up our pickles and give them a taste test. All right, so we got some big ones, some spears, and some discs, just to show you how versatile this recipe and technique is. Let's have a pickle. Here are the sliced discs. So crunchy, super good. Let's do a spear. I've packed these in pretty well. They're kind of hard to get. So, if you remember how flimsy it was, look at how well that pickle is holding. All right, crunch test. Oh, that's good. Can you hear that crunch? Let's get ready for the big pickle. Oh my God. Oh my God. Really good. Put that on a sandwich. Eat it like this. Guys, nothing better. Let's do a cross cut. Perfect. Perfect. Every time. Happy camper. Look how, oh my goodness, look at that. All right, so that is how I make vinegar pickles. Once again, my name is Matthew Cress of Cress Dietetics. You can find me either here on YouTube or on all other social media platforms, or at my website, cressdietetics.com, if you would like to work together. If you liked this video, please sure to give it a like, subscribe if you like my content, and leave a comment in the comment section below if you have a question or if you just liked what it is that I'm doing. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye.